So I just wanted to apologize to any of you who were expecting a real sadhu to give class today. I'm sorry, was Mukunda Maharaj's day and he's not feeling well. And so they asked me to give class. So I'm a very poor substitute. And I'm sorry if you had other expectations and you want to leave, that's fine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 23, Devahuti's Lamentation, Text 43. And it's June 19th, 2025 in New Govardhan, Australia. Prekshayitva bhuvo golam pratnyayavan swasamstaya bhavascharya mahayogi swashramaya navartata. Prekshayitva, after showing, bhuvaha, of the universe, golam, the globe, patnyai, to his wife, yavan, as much, swasamstaya, with its arrangements, bahu ascharyam, full of many wonders, mahayogi, the great yogi Kardama, swa ashramaya, to his own hermitage, nyavartata, returned. So again, this is about the story of Kardama Muni and Devahuti, who had traveled all over the universe. Srila Prabhupada's translation: after showing his wife the globe of the universe and its different arrangements, full of many wonders, the great yogi Kardama Muni returned to his own hermitage. Srila Prabhupada's purport: all the planets are here described as gola, round. Every planet is round, and each planet is a different shelter, just as islands in the great ocean. I don't know why people argue about this. I knew one of our Gurukul students who was studying science and who decided that he didn't want to follow Krishna consciousness because devotees were saying that the earth is flat. And he was feeling that we were all ignoramuses. So I just I'm going to read this again. All of the planets are here described as gola, round. Every planet is round. And each planet is a different shelter, just like islands in the great ocean. Planets are sometimes called Dvipa or Varsha. This Earth's planet is called Bharatvarsha because it was ruled by King Bharat. In other places, Prabhupada says it may be there are different Bharats, and he's not sure which Bharat the planet was named after. So India is still called Bharat. Another significant word used in this verse is bhavascharya, many wonderful things. This indicates that the different planets are distributed all over the universe in the 8 directions, and each and every one of them is wonderful in itself. Each planet has its particular climactic influences and particular types of inhabitants, and is completely equipped with everything, including the beauty of the seasons. So our Shastra stops this debate about, is there life on other planets? You know, is the Earth the only inhabited planet in all of the... We see so many stars and planets in the sky here in New Govardhan. Are we the only inhabitant place in the universe? And Prabhupada says, no, right? All these planets, the Shastra is saying, no, they all have their own wonders, yes, including the beauty of the seasons. Of course, even in the spiritual world, Krishna likes to have seasons. Although there's no seasons because of a material arrangement. So Kavi Kanapur very nicely describes in his Ananda Vrindavan Champu, which I'm reading again now, because it's so nectarian. And as I'm reading it, I'm thinking we should have this profusely illustrated. You know, so there are the 6 seasons in the spiritual world, and they're happening simultaneously. So as Krishna and Balaram and the cowherd boys and then the gopis, as they wander through the forests of Vrindavan, They wander from one seasonal forest to another. So they go in the spring forest and the summer forest and the autumn forest, the monsoon forest, the winter forest, and the foggy forest, which somehow has gotten translated as dewy, but it's not dewy, it's foggy. And then there's also a forest where all 6 seasons are there simultaneously, and Srimati Vrinda Devi orchestrates the different seasonal forests, displaying different flowers and fruits and climates in order to please Krishna and his associates. And then there's different pastimes they do in the seasonal forests. So in the spring forest, what's one of the favorite pastimes in the spring forest? Collecting flowers they do in all the forests, because each forest has their own particular type of flowers. What's the festival of beginning of spring? Holi. So they like to play Holi in the spring forest. And of course, what kind of pastimes are they going to do in a summer forest? That's easy. Water pastimes, yes. In the monsoon forest, they have their swinging pastimes. So we have a book in our children's series called Swing in the Monsoon, because when you swing, it has the same effect as having a fan. So the monsoon forest, raining and very humid, yes. And then, of course, we know in the autumn forest especially, they like to dance. Yes, and there's not much information about the difference between the 2 parts of winter, the early winter and the foggy winter. Those 2 seasons, not too much description to distinguish the pastimes. But Vrinda Devi brings warm chaddars and coats made of like crimson color and deep blue color. And then in the kunjas, there's fires and burning incense smoke and hot drinks, and the gopis don't wear any pearls. So they have these different seasonal forests, and Krishna enjoys all these seasons. So because the seasons are there in the spiritual world, and it's explained also that all of the planets appear there, but they're there to serve the Lord. They're not there as material planets. So in the spiritual world, you can also look up at the night sky and see different glowing planets, which are all living entities there to serve the Lord. So then in this material world, we have also different kinds of seasons on different planets, different atmospheres, just like even on this planet. So, I flew here from London where it was beginning spring, and I came here to where it's winter. Of course, London spring and New Govardhan winter is about the same. But, different things growing, different kinds of flowers, different kinds of trees, different kinds of animals. So many people come to Australia just to see your animals, all the weird animals that you have here. So on different planets, imagine how many kinds of weird animals there must be, and different sorts of entities. And that we're going on with the purport. In the Brahma Samhita 540, it is similarly stated, Vibhuti Bhinam. In each and every planet there are different opulences. It cannot be expected that one planet is exactly like another. By God's grace, by nature's law. Interesting, it always fascinates me that Srila Prabhupada equates nature's laws with God's laws. And here he's equating nature's law with God's grace. If we want to understand what is Krishna's desire, Krishna's law, Krishna's grace, we can look at how nature operates. So if we think that we're doing something that Krishna wants and it's in opposition to nature and biology and nature's law, we must be wrong. By God's grace, by nature's law, each and every planet is made differently and has different wonderful features. All such wonders were personally experienced by Kardama Muni while he traveled with his wife. Yet he could return again to his humble hermitage. So they were just sightseeing, but he was happy to live. Both of them were happy to live in a humble hermitage. He showed his princess wife that although he was living in the hermitage, he had the power to go everywhere and do anything by mystic yoga. That is the perfection of yoga. So, very important point here, that although Devahuti was a princess wife, she was born in royalty, she did not have the temperament of a princess. Her temperament was the same as that of her husband. So how do I know that? Because Kardama Muni asked the Lord, he said, I want a wife of the same temperament. The word there is sama. I want a wife who's going to be the same temperament. And when Lord Vishnu saw him, he said, I'm arranging for a wife who is of the same temperament. So we find throughout the Shastra the concept that all human beings, male and female, have different temperaments, which are generally divided into 4 categories. And the concept was that men and women should marry each other when they had a similar temperament. One reason for that is then you have a similar psychology, a similar set of values, a similar set of ethics. You'll understand each other. And another reason was that traditionally husband and wife worked in the same occupation. So women had occupations, they contributed financially to the family and to the world, but they did so in the context of their family along with their husbands. So if you have the same temperament, you can have a family business together, you can run a farm together, or you can be potters together, or you can run a school together, or you can run a government together, like Draupadi was assisting her husbands. So both Kardama Muni and Devahuti were very satisfied to live in a humble hermitage. That is the perfection of yoga, going on with the purport, that is the perfection of yoga. One cannot become a perfect yogi simply by showing some sitting postures, nor by such sitting postures or so-called meditation can one become God, as is being advertised. So this is, Prabhupada's talking about situations he was running into both in India and in his Western preaching. Foolish persons are misled into believing that simply by some caricature of meditation and sitting postures, one can become God within 6 months. So there were actually advertisements that Srila Prabhupada saw in Philadelphia that said, Ravinda Sri Prabhu was talking about this, how it said, Buddha meditated and became God, and Krishna meditated and became God, and Jesus meditated and became God, and with our program, in 6 months, you too can meditate and become God. And there were these posters up all over Philadelphia. So Prabhupada is definitely thinking about that and writing this purport. There's one lecture where Prabhupada said the reason he didn't call his society the International Society for God Consciousness, which I always assumed was some Western consideration, but he said it because otherwise you'll bring so many gods. So it was coming from a Hindu perspective. He said, somebody will say, oh, this is a god, this is a god, this is a god. So I wanted to say Krishna consciousness, not God consciousness. Last paragraph to the purport. Here is the example of a perfect yogi. He could travel all over the universe. Similarly, there is a description of Durvasa Muni, who also traveled in space. Actually, the perfect yogi can do that. But even if one can travel all over the universe and show wonderful feats like Kardama Muni, he cannot be compared to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose power and inconceivable energy can never be attained by any conditioned or liberated soul. By the actions of Kardama Muni, we can understand that in spite of his immense power, he remained a devotee of the Lord. That is the real position of every living entity. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, this ending here. By the actions of Kardama Muni, we can understand that in spite of his immense mystic power, he remained a devotee of the Lord. That is the real position of every living entity. Prekshayitva bhuvo golam pyatnyayavan swasamstaya bhavascharayam mahayogi swasamaya navartita. After showing his wife the globe of the universe and its different arrangements, full of many wonders, the great yogi Kardama Muni returned to his own hermitage. So our real position is to be a humble devotee of the Lord. I mean, you know what it's like when we try to act as something that we're not, right? It's exhausting. If we try to pretend that we're greater than we are, or smarter than we are, or more competent than we are. Someone was talking to me the other day and said, well, the reason I'm hesitant to teach classes is what do I do when people ask me questions and I don't know the answer? And I said, well, you can just say, I don't know. You don't have to pretend that you know everything. It's exhausting. In this world, we're all trying to pretend that we're something that we're not. Ultimately, we're trying to pretend that we're the owner and the controller, that we have it together, right? Yeah? I've got my life together. I know what I'm doing. I can control the world. I've figured out how the world works. But the fact is that that's not true. None of us have it all figured out, as Krishna shows us over and over again, isn't it? We think we have it all figured out, and then he's like, oh, you actually don't. We think we're the controller, and we're not. We think we're some big enjoyer of everything, and we're not. So it's such a relief to just be a little insignificant devotee. It's such a relief. It's so joy. Humility is joy. So we find so many living entities, they're trying to amass power and control so that they can be the enjoyers of the world, up to having this kind of mystic power. Let's travel to all the planets. Let's be able to enjoy every kind of atmosphere. Now, if someone who's a devotee, if someone says, I want to surrender to Krishna, but they're still holding on to this enjoyment spirit, Krishna may take away their opulences to break this enjoying spirit. But the real glory is when somebody can have power and opulence, like Kardama Muni, and still stay a devotee. So that's actually the real mercy of the Lord. So we have so many examples of materialistic persons in the Shastra who try to amass power and opulence and mystic power so that they can imagine that they become God, as Prabhupada talks about this purport. So can you think of some personalities like that in the Shastra? Hiranyakashipu. So he epitomizes this mentality. His benedictions, putting aside the benedictions that he couldn't be killed this way, that way, the other way, what were some of his other benedictions? Beside the I can't be killed this way, that way. Well, then he couldn't be immortal, so he tried to trick it. But putting aside the immortal ones, what else did he get? All the mystic powers. All the mystic powers. So he could do what Kardama Muni could do. Also that he would have no rival. He would be the chief with no rival. He'd be the top. Of course, he wasn't. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva were still outside of his control. So that I would have all mystic powers and no rival. By the way, was Hiranyakashipu happy when he got this, when he got all his benedictions? I can't be killed this way, that way, the other way, day, night, inside, outside, up, down, weapons, not weapons, living, not living. I'll have no rival, and I have all mystic powers. It seems like if we got that, we would be happy, doesn't it? I mean, it does. If someone said to me, okay, Urmila, today you can have all the mystic powers, I'd go, whoa. That's pretty far out. Was he happy? No, he wasn't happy. He was not happy. There are two symptoms given in the Bhagavatam that he was not happy. One is that he was always intoxicated. Happy people are not always intoxicated. In fact, happy people don't need to get intoxicated at all. Correct? What to speak of always being intoxicated. And he was also yelling at the demigods for no reason. That's a prime symptom of an unhappy person. I'm sure we have in our own experience. When is it that we snap at people unnecessarily? If we're sick, if we're tired, if we're stressed in some way. Am I correct? Right? If you're exhausted and you're hungry and you're thirsty and you've had a really hard day, so you may get irritated at people over nothing that you normally wouldn't respond to. Do we all have this experience? Everyone has this experience? Anyone here who's not human? So if we're constantly, have you ever met somebody who's constantly snapping at people over nothing and little things? Like all the time? Yeah. And you can immediately understand this is not a happy person. Something's wrong. So Hiranyakashipu got all this, and he still wasn't happy. Amazing, huh? Somebody else from the Shastra who was trying to do this. Oh, I didn't even think of him, Pandraka. Yeah, that's such a cool story, Pandraka. It said that he had like 2 artificial arms. I don't know, whenever I think of that, I get like a mental picture from these chintzy Hindi movies of Mahabharata, where they have these, really, like paper mache arms and, colored aluminum crowns and things like that. He's like, I'm God. Didn't work out very well for him. He said, Krishna, give me your name and your weapons. And Krishna's like, I'll give you my weapon. Someone else in the Shastra. Ravana, another very good example. So he builds a kingdom out of gold. He also had a lot of mystic powers, a lot of learning. He thought he could do whatever he wanted, up into stealing the consort of the Lord. Thinking about Sukracharya. So Sukracharya, he also, now he wanted to do it through rulers because he was a Brahmana, so he didn't want to directly rule, but he wanted to be the chief priest of someone who could rule and have all powers through them, which is why when Bali is about to give everything to Vamandev, Sukracharya gets very upset. How will you pay me? How will I maintain my position? And so you see, he's also always in anxiety. And then we have, of course, Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, who have this mentality as well. And if I can't get everything fairly, I'm going to get things unfairly. This is also materialistic mentality. If I can't get power and opulence properly, then I'm going to somehow cheat. So I think we can all see some of this in ourselves, yes? I mean, it may be on a very, very small scale. We may just think, oh, if I could just figure out material nature, I find this tendency whenever people ask, when people ask me, how did you break your hand? And I'm wondering for a lot of people if the question is that they're thinking, well, if I can figure out how other people get injured, then I can avoid those situations myself. Or I know many people who've gone through some kind of betrayal in their life. Somebody really cheated them, really betrayed them. And their response to that is, well, I've learned my lesson and I'll never be cheated again. And I'm thinking, good luck with that one. I tell people, if you live long enough, someone's going to cheat you again. Someone's going to betray your trust. Someone's going to lie to you. It's just the way the world is. But we're thinking like that. If I just study these things, I'll be able never to be cheated. No one will ever lie to me. I'll never make a bad purchase again. I'll know where to research. I'll make sure I never get sick. I make sure I never get injured. If I just, do the right exercises, eat the right food, eat the right supplements, do this. If I just do all of this right, none of these bad things will happen to me. Do we find ourselves thinking like that to some extent? That I'm going to try to manipulate material nature and figure it out so that I can enjoy. So sometimes a person takes up spiritual life but doesn't give up this enjoying spirit. And of course, this is one of the offenses, to not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy name and to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. And whenever I hear that one, I think, am I maintaining some other attachment, some other shelter? Is it like Krishna and? Well, yes, I'm going to take shelter of Krishna, but I'm also going to make sure I have a good phone. And I'm going to take shelter of Krishna, but I'm also make sure that I eat like this. I'm also going to make sure that I do this, and that way I'll be protected. Is it Krishna and? And what Krishna does is if someone's really foolish in this way, he'll take away these false shelters so that there is no Krishna and anymore. There's just Krishna. Of course, I have to be very careful about preaching about this sort of thing. As I discovered, I've been telling you personal stories. Should I tell you another personal story? Okay. So I was in Puerto Rico. Long story as to why I was in Puerto Rico. what I was doing there. But anyway, I went there with nothing. Like, I had nothing. I didn't have $1. I had really just, like, absolutely nothing. Again, that's a long story, how that happened. But that was the situation. I had nothing. And one of my godsisters was running a little cosmetics shop in the mall. And as soon as I got there, she said, Urmila, one of my salespeople just left. Would you please fill in for her? Otherwise, I can't run my business. So out of great affection for her, she's a very dear friend of mine, I said, sure, I'll do that for you. Which meant going down the mountain on a windy road and back up the mountain on a windy road afterwards. I'd always have to take like a half an hour to recover, my stomach to recover after that. And then it was like doing book distribution, but with cosmetics. Like, we had our kiosk in the middle of the corridor, the walkway, and we're running up to people saying, here, try this nail buffer. Here, try this lotion. And I just felt really like contaminated doing this. I absolutely hated doing this work. And then we were paid solely on commission. So you're very motivated to sell people stuff because that's the only way you make any money. And the whole thing just was really unpalatable to me. I actively hated it. Anyway, I worked just one day a week, and the first time I got $50, which was a lot because, like I said, I didn't have any money at all. And the next week again I worked, it was on a Saturday, and I got another $50, so I had a whooping $100. And then that Sunday I gave the Sunday Feast lecture. And it was, the temple was on top of a mountain, and we didn't usually, hardly anybody came there during the week, and we didn't lock our door. And so for that Sunday feast also, I forgot that they told me that on Sunday it's probably a good idea to lock your door, and so I didn't lock my door, and you can understand what happened. But I'm giving the Sunday feast lecture, and I'm saying, Krishna gives and Krishna takes away, and whatever he does is wonderful, whether he gives or he takes away. And Krishna was obviously listening to my lecture. And so he said, okay, can I take everything away? And I go back to my room, and my $100 have been stolen. At which point I just cracked up, and I'm like, okay. Huh? So sometimes Krishna sees like that. If someone's thinking, my husband is my shelter, then your husband dies, or he betrays you, or something happens, and you don't have a husband anymore. Or my children are my shelter, or my money is my shelter. My equipment is my shelter. My intelligence is my shelter. My functioning body is my shelter. These are our general shelters, right? Our body, our mind, our friends and family, maybe our pets. I have one godsister, she says, my family's rejected me, but I have my dog. So, our pets, our things, with other living entities, our connections, our networks. And so sometimes when someone is depending on those things, Krishna says, let's take this away so you can see what is the real shelter. So who did this happen to in the Shastra? Well, not everything. Krishna doesn't usually take away everything. Like I had a godsister years ago who said, Krishna took everything away. I'm like, can you walk? He doesn't usually take away everything, but he'll take away things that we're very attached to as a shelter. Some examples from the Shastra? Bali. So I love this section when Vamadev comes to Bali, and Vamadev says, I just want 3 paces of land. And Bali says, you are very foolish. You should ask from me something so great that you'll never have to ask anything from anyone else ever, because I am the master of the universe. And Vamadev's like, who's the only person who can make such a statement? You can ask from me something so great that you'll never have to ask anything from anyone else ever. Who's the only person who can say that? Krishna. So Bali says that to Krishna. Yes, so Vamadev takes away his possessions. Okay, who else? Gajendra. Yeah, he had actually been a yogi, and he was cursed to be an elephant. And then he's just impinged by this crocodile. Who else? Chitraketu, yes. And this happens to Chitraketu twice. So first he loses his only child and a bunch of his queens who would poison the child. And then he starts traveling all over the universe with his ladies' Sankirtan party. He had all these women, Vijayadhara women, and they were doing Sankirtan all over the universe. And then he lost that, and he became Vitrasura. Yeah, so he lost all of his prestige, all of his beauty, all of his influence. Yes. Anybody else? King Yayati. Yes. That was very temporary, but yes. Bharat Maharaj. Yeah, he became a deer. That was definitely losing. The Pandavas at the end. Of course, the Pandavas periodically. So the Pandavas, they're apparently burned in the house of lac when they lose everything. Then they're exiled for 13 years. The last year, they have to work incognito. And then at the very end, when they lose all their abilities, Arjuna can't even string his bow anymore. So they keep going through cycles of losing things. Keshava Kashmiri in Chaitanya Lila, where he was very proud of his learning and his benedictions from Mother Saraswati. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu defeats him. So it was kind of semi-private. He was defeated just in front of Mahaprabhu's students. He wasn't defeated in front of the whole village. But it was still enough to completely humiliate him. So Krishna's not sentimental. And if we're trying to be little Hiranyakashipus in our own way while chanting Hare Krishna, then he may say, okay, let's remove some false shelter that you're holding on to so that you see what is the real shelter. And I'm sure we've all experienced this too, yes? That things that we're attached to, that we're holding on to, that we think are going to make us enjoyers of the world, that Krishna either shakes it really hard or removes it in some way. Now, the real glory is what we're looking at here with Kardama Muni. The real glory is you've got everything. Kardama Muni had all mystic powers. He could do anything that Hiranyakashipu wanted to do. But as Prabhupada says at the end of the purport, but he stays a devotee. His devotion to Krishna is not shaken by all of his opulence and all of his enjoyment. He's having so much material enjoyment, but he's happy. He's happy to have that enjoyment in service, and he's happy to live in his hermitage in service. It doesn't matter to him, and his mood is that of a humble servant. So can we think of some personalities who had great opulences of one kind or another, or great power, great learning, and still remained as humble devotees? Ambarish Maharaj. And Prabhupada will talk about how he was this great king. He had so much power, so much influence, but still he was always a humble devotee. Rupa and Sanatan. Oh, I like that example. Rupa and Sanatan, yes. So they were very influential ministers in a very influential government, but still they were always just humble devotees. Their mood was that of service. And they only took that position of ministers to be of service, to protect the Vaishnavas. King Priyavata. Oh, that's also a nice example. So King Priyavata was a renunciate, and then because Lord Brahma asked him, he took up rulership, he got married, he became a great king, but he always remained in this mood of a surrendered devotee, and as soon as he could hand over the responsibilities to someone else, he again went to renunciation. King Prataparudra, yes, of course, Lord Chaitanya externally didn't want to meet with him because he said sannyasis shouldn't meet with wealthy, influential people. The sannyasi will be criticized like that. Of course, Prabhupada met with wealthy, influential people for preaching purposes. It was a little different mentality. But King Prataparudra, he never stopped being a great devotee of the Lord. Any other examples? Shivananda is sane, yeah. He was also very wealthy, very influential, and he used his wealth and influence to serve the devotees. Can you think of someone in Chaitanya Lila who looked like a big materialist and wasn't? Pundarik Vijayanidhi. So when Gadadhar Pandit saw him, he said, oh, here's a big sense enjoyer. And as soon as who else was there? Mukunda. As soon as Mukunda recited that verse about Putana, then Pundarik Vijayanidhi, he couldn't contain his ecstasy. Thinking a lot about Prahlad Maharaj. You know, Lord Nrsingadev says, I want you now to rule the demons, but to rule the demons as a devotee. And I thought of one example from Bhagavatam, and I know for sure that this was also explained like this in Krishna book, but the posthumous edition of Krishna book doesn't have all this in it, so I had to go to the Bhagavatam verses. So this is Bhagavatam 10, Canto 10, chapter 41, starting with verse 42. So pleased with the weaver, this is in Mathura, pleased with the weaver, the Supreme Lord Krishna blessed him that after death he would achieve the liberation of attaining a form like the Lord's, and that while in this world he would enjoy supreme opulence, physical strength, influence, memory, and sensory vigor. So, you know, after Krishna kills the washerman, then there's this weaver or tailor who takes, and in the Bhagavatam it says weaver, but Prabhupada calls him a tailor, and he must have been a tailor. Weaver doesn't make any sense. So after Krishna and Balaram get these cloths from the washerman, then they give them to a tailor who fashions them into garments for the Lord. And so the Lord says, you can go back to Godhead, and also you're going to enjoy the opulences of the world without being distracted. So a little later, Krishna and Balaram go to Sudama, not the cowherd boy Sudama. Anyone remembers what Sudama's job was? Garlands. He was a garland maker. I was looking in my research for this for people in each of the Varnas, because I was thinking if you look at the Bhagavatam, you're mostly going to find Kshatriyas, right? Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu used to say that Bhagavatam's full of Kshatriyas because they're very interesting. So I wanted to look at some other Varnas. So here we're looking at people in the field of artistry, the tailor or weaver, and the garland maker. So the two lords then went to the house of the garland maker Sudama. They offered the surrendered Sudama, who was bowing down before them, whatever benedictions he wanted. Sudama chose unshakable devotion for Krishna, the supreme soul of all existence, friendship with his devotees, and transcendental compassion for all living entities. See, I want devotion to the Lord, I want to be friends with the devotees, and I want to be compassionate to all living entities. So Krishna gave Sudama those benedictions, but he also gave him strength, long life, fame, beauty, and ever-increasing prosperity for his family. So again, this was somebody who could have all these material benedictions, all these material opulences. Actually, Prabhupada says when one gets opulences from the Lord, they're not actually material. And also be a devotee. So another example that I thought of from Chaitanya Lila, this is from Adi 1051 purport, is Murari Gupta. Murari Gupta worked as a physician. It says Murari Gupta could treat both bodily and spiritual diseases because he was a physician by profession and a great devotee of the Lord in terms of spiritual advancement. This is an example of service to humanity, Srila Prabhupada says. So here we have someone who on the external level was very learned, very capable, very qualified, and at the same time a humble devotee. So looking for someone in the field of resources, one of the most famous persons there is Udarana Datta. Udarana Datta in Krishna Lila is one of the cowherd boys. He's a great devotee of Lord Nityananda, and he's mostly explained in Adi 1141. So there in the purport, Prabhupada explains that Nityananda Prabhu, after staying for some time in Kadadaha, came to Saptagram and stayed in the house of Udarana Datta. The Suvarnaka Vanik community to which Udarana Datta belonged was actually a Vaishnava community. Its members were bankers and gold merchants. Suvarna means gold and Vanik means merchant. So here we have these various examples. We have, of course, in a more modern time, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was a magistrate, very well respected, had a lot of power and influence in his community, and also a very surrendered devotee. And we could think of so many examples, and I'm sure we can think of so many examples in our modern Hare Krishna movement. So the real glory is when the devotee can have power, they can have opulence, they can have abilities, but they stay a devotee. And then it's understood that this power, this opulence, and this abilities is not the result of karma. It's a result of the Lord's grace. So I remember once, I don't remember what I was talking about, what the topic of my class was, but it was a Sunday feast class, and one of the guests said, "Can't we have both material enjoyment and Krishna consciousness?" And my answer is yes, but not if you want to be a materialistic enjoyer. Not if you want to be a materialistic enjoyer. Because as soon as we're conscious of Krishna, we can no longer try to enjoy his world separately from him. It's not possible. You cannot try to exploit somebody who you actually love. Those two things are incompatible. So if you want to be an exploiter, you have to not really be aware of the presence of God or our loving relationship with him. But yes, just like in the spiritual world, there's all spiritual opulences that are beyond our conception. That anyone who has full love for Krishna has full opulences. And in the higher planets of this universe, the more you're a devotee, the more you have access to opulence and power. But the devotee always stays a devotee. So how do we do that? To always remember, Bhaktiram yakatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram. Krishna is the enjoyer of whatever I have. I don't have my paraphernalia as my shelter. I have my paraphernalia as my equipment for service. I don't have my body and mind as my shelter, but I have them as my equipment for service. I don't have my family and friends and network as my shelter, but I have them as people I can serve for Krishna. And however Krishna empowers me, it's so I can do some nice service for him. Like Srila Prabhupada sending Tamal Krishna Maharaj to Mayapur to secure the property and giving him the money to do so. It's not my money, it's Krishna's money that's given to me so that I can do some service for him. Whatever I have, a bicycle, a car, or a computer, or whatever I have, a phone, whatever physical ability I have, it's so I can do service for Krishna. But Krishna also wants to give his devotee enjoyment. We've been talking about this with people. They're saying, am I allowed to be happy? And my question is always, what kind of God are you serving? Why do you want to serve a God who wants you to suffer? What kind of a mentality is this? Why would you want to spend all of eternity with some all-powerful being who doesn't desire your happiness? If you're a good employer, will you pay your employees nicely? Will you be happy to see your employees flourishing? Yes? Yeah. So Krishna is the best employer. Prabhupada says the servant enjoys practically on the level of the master. As I've been saying the last few days, Krishna is not envious. He doesn't have the mood of, I need to have more than you. We can never independently have the power of Krishna, but with Krishna, Krishna's like, yes, please be happy. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would serve out to the devotees the particular type of prasadam that they each liked. That's Krishna's mood. Krishna wants us to be in our own place. We've been talking a lot about Varnashram. Krishna wants us to be in our own place, not just because that's the place where we're going to be most effective in doing service, but also because that's the place that we're going to feel the most satisfaction. Krishna wants us to be happy and satisfied in his service. Srila Prabhupada wants us to be happy and satisfied. He said, chant Hare Krishna and be what? Miserable? No, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Krishna actually would like to give us all of his potencies and his powers to use in his service, as long as we remain a servant. So whatever we're getting, we can relish in relationship to Krishna. Well, there is one other person who had things taken away that I forgot to mention, and a very interesting person. Yes, although with Prabhupada it's a little different, and I thought long and hard whether I should talk about Prabhupada in that regard, because Srila Prabhupada, when he lost his business and so forth, he said he went to that verse about that Krishna takes away out of mercy. He said, but then I realized that Krishna just wanted me to start this movement in another way. And I thought that if Prabhupada came to the West with a lot of money and prestige and followers, then people might attribute his success to something material. Whereas because Prabhupada came with practically nothing, we have no choice but to attribute his success to his spiritual potency. But I'm thinking of a very unusual person, Sudama Vipra. So our acharyas comment that the reason that Krishna gave Sudama Vipra so much wealth is that his shelter was his renunciation. Vairagya is also one of the 6 opulences. So someone may be attached to money or power or mystic power or something like that. Sudama Vipra was attached to his vairagya. He had some pride. I am so renounced. And Krishna's response to that is, no, the point is to be a devotee. And Krishna basically, showered him with all this opulence to use in service. So whether Krishna gives us opulence to use in service, whether he takes away opulence, whether it comes and goes in our life, like we were talking about the Pandavas, sometimes they had it, sometimes they didn't have it. Whatever we have, let us always remember this is Krishna's gifts. Let me enjoy, like about Sudama Vipra, it was said that whatever he had, he enjoyed as the Lord's prasadam. When he was in poverty, he took this is the Lord's will. When he had everything, he took this as the Lord's will. Let me enjoy this as the Lord's mercy, as the Lord's prasadam. This is the Lord's gift to me. And then we will never become bewildered, and we will always be happy, whether we're flying around the universe or in a simple hermitage. So, questions, comments, additions, subtractions, corrections, chastisements. Sometimes I get them, might as well ask for them.
Thank you for the class. You were mentioning past 3 days about how Krishna, when you gain his trust, he gives all opulence and empowerment, and the to Guru and Krishna, and you gave your own example, Kadama Muni, and quite a few today. Can you talk about the mindset of someone observing someone who's been given empowerment? Because the tendency could be enviousness, jealousy, wanting to compete and bypassing the etiquette and the hard work, but wanting the benefits of that.
So you want me to talk about envy? I recently gave a class on envy in London. I guess you could listen to that online, because I don't know if I want to give a whole other class about envy. But the mood of the devotee should be, there should be some competition, but it should be inspired competition, not envious competition. So if I see, Krishna's empowered this devotee, it's fine to think, let me also become empowered by Krishna. What we want to avoid is criticizing that person and saying, that person's attached. They're just functioning on the platform of ego. That's what we want to avoid. We want to say, how wonderful, Krishna's empowered that devotee. Maybe I could get empowered too. Maybe I could do something wonderful for Krishna. I might never do anything as wonderful as that devotee. Like I see Shiva Ram Maharaj's beautiful books, and I think, wow, amazing that he can produce such beautiful books. I think there's no way I'm ever going to be able to produce as many books or as beautiful a books before I leave this body. But let me do some books. Maybe I can do some kind of books. So like that. Should be something like that. oh, look what somebody cooked for Krishna. I don't know if I can ever cook anything that wonderful for Krishna, but maybe Krishna can empower me to cook something nice for him. So that kind of competition is one that Prabhupada says competition gives life. Shouldn't be afraid of competition. But envy is I'm trying to tear somebody else down. Envy means I don't want anyone to have anything as good or better than I have. Is that all right? Anybody else? Yes. Oh, Sajani, you look like you belong in the brahmachari ashram with your socks. Our typical hallmark, yes?
I just got thank you for the class, it was really nice. I've just got a bit of a random question about the...
Random question, okay.
8,400,000 species of life, and how is that possible within this universe when there's so many other planetary systems and...
You think there should be more?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, even on the Earth, like, you know, modern scientists say that there's so many species.
Well, I'm going to have to answer with, I do not know how the Shastra defines species. Yeah. And I don't know if I haven't met anyone else who knows exactly. Even how scientists define species is debatable.
Maybe it means, I'm just guessing, maybe it means like a type of consciousness, like how it's something...
There's discussions of this among like our Bhaktivedanta Institute scientists. As far as I know, and I may be wrong, I'm a social scientist, I'm not a hard scientist, so this is going out of my realm of training. Species are generally defined as what can reproduce and produce a fertile offspring. So that's generally how it's defined. But for example, the Shastra talks about 400,000 human species. And from my understanding, that includes like some demigods and some kind of like semi-demigods. And definitely there can be reproduction between demigods and humans. There's so many examples of that in our scriptures, and there's so many examples of that in all the old cultures of the world. There can even be reproduction between humans and some of these lower, I don't want them to hear me and get offended, but so I don't know if I should say lower, but like the nature spirits, which are sort of some sort of human species. The Nagas, yeah. And there's the Yakshas, and like here, I'm sure, for sure, you have various beings who are in charge of each of these mountains and each of these forest areas. There's beings in charge of each of the types of plants and flowers and that kind of thing. Some people can see them and talk to them. In Iceland, they take them very seriously. They actually, the government consults with them before they do anything. So a lot of those species can reproduce with humans or with devas. But yet the Shastra seems to consider them different species. So exactly what their demarcation line is for species, I don't know. I'm sorry, that's not terribly helpful. Anybody else? Yes, Prabhu.
Just on that point of having more than 8.4 million, but within each species there's unlimited variety.
That's also true. So again, we're coming to how do you define species? So if we're going to say like dog, but how many kinds of dogs are there? Or if you're going to say apples, how many kinds of apples are there? So we have varieties within the variety. I mean, even on this planet, if we're going to say there's one human species, but there's still so many varieties, races and ethnicities and so forth. So that could be. But again, this is beyond. I really don't think I can speak authoritatively on this at all. Yes?
Didn't Srila Prabhupada explain it in terms, I think he starts in his lectures, he gives a mathematical understanding of the three modes.
According to the gunas,
and
yes.
then if you go 3 by 3 is 9, 9 is 81, and then he goes, eventually you get 8,400,000 species.
Yes. So Prabhupada's saying that the species are defined by the particular combination of the modes of nature. But again, what is exactly the demarcation of where does a species begin and end in terms of defining a species? I don't know. And I'm not personally aware of anything in the Shastra that gives like that kind of a clear definition. And I know even modern scientists, when they define species, there's sometimes debate about if something is a species or a subspecies, or so that such demarcations, and our modern scientific demarcations are definitely not exactly the same as the Vedic demarcations. That I know for sure. But even within modern science, exactly how they demarcate species is not absolutely universally agreed upon. Yeah?
You spoke a couple of days ago in Bhagavatam. Krishna appears in all the different species of life. So there's reference there, and then those species are worshipped by, those incarnations are worshipped by different entities, and then they appear in their Svarup in the spiritual world. So,
yes.
So I think the species here are ultimately a reflection of the spiritual world.
That's also a fact, yes, according to Srila Sanatana Goswami. Just like the planets and the seasons here, as I was talking about in the beginning, they're reflections of the variegated planets of the spiritual world and all the seasons there. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai.